and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani,
And I'm Sam.
and today we're going to be talking about the 1946s. I
Night
was, I was going to say 1900s, and I was like, that's not right, but we start in 1946.
19, yeah. The
Mid 1900s.
Okay,
That still sounds so crazy.
it does.
Oh, all right. Paul John Knowles was born on April 25th, 1946, in Orlando, Florida. He was one of 5 children. His father was touted as an alcoholic and a harsh disciplinarian, though neither parent really paid much attention to the children as they grew. None of them would have attended school if not enforced by a truant officer.
Mm.
Paul rebelled as a result, fighting with his father the most frequently out of all of the children. In his young age, he was picked up by police at one point for stealing a bicycle, and rather than doing anything for him, Paul's parents made him a ward of the state.
Oh, God.
Like they were like, that's an embarrassment, so
We're done with you.
yeah, we're done with
We
you.
give up.
My uncle actually, I don't know if they made him a ward of the state, but he ended up in a boys' home at one point when he was younger. But that's because they couldn't control him, and he was just doing deviant things, and they're like, we don't know what else to do
Oh,
with
my
him.
God.
So I read this and I was like, oh, there's my uncle.
Oh, my
This is not
God.
him. This is not
Right.
his case. One day we'll get to him when my family finishes their stories, but not yet. So he rebelled against all of the group homes he was placed in. He never adhered to curfews. He stole what he wanted, and he simply did as he pleased. He learned to pick locks. After one too many issues in foster homes, he was then sent to orphanages. There, he fought with staff to the point where he was physically punished almost daily.
Mm.
Eventually, all of this was too much, and he was sent to Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys near Marianna, Florida.
Oh, Florida.
Yeah. The School for Boys was a place that, at the time, housed the worst offenders in the area, and many of them already had serious crimes under their belt, and they were criminals at ages 10 to 13.
Wow.
So just babies.
Yeah.
So young. The school was a campus of sorts. It had cottages where many of the boys lived, but there was also a block that housed prison-style cells for those that couldn't be controlled, as the campus didn't have a border or fence at the time.
Yeah, I was just thinking like cottages for like unruly kids seems, unless you're surrounded by a bunch of like wetlands, but seems like a difficult place to,
Risky.
yeah, to like maintain and manage these kids who now live in their own little like houses, basically.
Hmm. They managed to keep them convinced to stay for the most part.
Hmm.
I know. The dining hall was constructed by those who lived there. In the middle of the campus was the quote unquote White House, which was an 11-room detention center that had isolation rooms for those who got out of line. The boys in solitary were also subjected to daily punishments or torture, essentially. Boys were hogtied and left lying on the concrete floor for days. They were beaten with whips, canes, and fists. They were raped by other boys and staff members.
Oh my God.
And as a result of all of this, numerous boys died within the confines of the school prior to Paul even arriving.
Wow. This is
Mm-hmm.
a state-run facility?
Mm-hmm.
Oh God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, at that time, I feel like a lot of these state facilities have the same track record or the same stories that come out of this torture and abuse and
Yeah.
coming from both the boys within and the staff. And they're all egregious places, it sounds like.
It's definitely a different time.
Mm-hmm. Boot Hill Cemetery was created on the north side of the campus to house those that couldn't handle their punishments.
Oh.
After several of the deaths resulted in the school being investigated multiple times, they simply stopped reporting all of the deaths and added the bodies to the cemetery, or like the outskirts of the cemetery.
Oh no.
By the time the school was shut down in 2011,
No.
50 unidentified bodies were unearthed, and not all, again, were in the cemetery. This didn't include the over 100 deaths that were reported by the school.
Unnamed individuals.
Mhm.
as well because they're not reporting them. So, I
Mhm.
mean, what would this school like? How would they explain it to potentially parents who would call? Like,
There's no border. How do you know they didn't just run away?
oh my God, 2011 or
Yeah, is when it
yeah,
finally shut down.
whoa.
Mhm.
Do you know when the last death was?
I don't. I didn't see that part.
Hmm. Hopefully not
I was
recently.
just gonna say, hopefully not recently.
Yeah.
Still, the school touted their reform at the time Paul was admitted. Not because they were actually reforming anybody, but most boys were broken within 6 months and became compliant with anything they could in order to get out of school or to stop being beaten. Still, Paul managed to stay in school and alive until after his 18th birthday. He was released on the streets the day after in 1964 with a new change of clothes and nothing else. It sounds like he was basically just working in a chain gang one day, and they were like, "Hey, come with me." And they gave him a new set of clothes, drove him into the town, and dropped him off and just left without saying anything.
My God, I bet you the local community hated this place.
Hmm.
Like, they just bring you 18-year-old
Hmm.
hardened criminals and say,
Hmm.
no, he's your problem
Yep,
now.
he's yours. It also says that in multiple places that he didn't know what to do because they didn't say anything. They weren't like, "You're released." He thought it was a test, and so he stood there for hours, like
Oh,
refused to move because he was afraid that as soon as he did, they'd be like, "Oh, you're out of line," and beat him again. And
oh,
then
that's
finally,
sad.
like he realized that, oh, nobody's coming, and decided to like start walking down the road. And then
That's
was
pretty
like,
sad.
yeah, and then was like nervous when the cars come by that he was gonna get picked up again.
I mean, it's like he was you know, basically kidnapped his whole life, and his kidnapper just one day said, all right, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
You're free.
We're done.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, and the reason he got released the next day is because they lose funding when he turned 18. It's a boys' home, so once you're
right.
18, you're an adult. They're done with you. So they're
Yeah.
like, "All right, goodbye." I can't even imagine.
No.
Naturally, he began burglarizing homes in order to survive.
I mean, what else are
Because
you gonna do?
after a while, he stole a car to get out of town. He drove until the tank ran dry and simply stole another car and took off again.
All of these things seem very practical to me.
They do for somebody who has no other
Yeah.
skills and was never taught
And no
anything.
money.
Yep.
And like you literally, there's nothing else you could do at
Hmm.
that point.
He survived by pickpocketing, stealing items of value, and selling them at pawn shops. But soon that wasn't enough, and he went from small thefts to bigger things, such as breaking and entering of private residences. Paul would steal items from a few houses, sell them at pawn shops, and then get out of town before the police
Hmm.
realized that there was a string of burglaries happening.
Yeah, like, again, I get it.
I know.
I
I know.
understand, Paul.
Yeah. For now, I do.
Yeah.
That was until his luck ran out until in 1965 when the now 19-year-old was driving in one of his many stolen vehicles and police lights turned on behind him. As the car was too old to outrun the police, he simply pulled over. The cop started yelling at him as he got out of the vehicle, and so when the cop got close, Paul pulled the pistol from the police officer's belt and stuck the barrel under his chin and told him to get in the car. And he says
Oh,
later of it, like that was like a reaction. He didn't even realize he was doing it at the time. And he just pulled it.
that's a bad decision.
At 19, I know. They drove down the road until another police officer came from the other direction, lights already on. The first police officer had radioed in to dispatch that he was pulling over the vehicle and then was silent afterwards, prompting police to come out to find out what was
What's
happening.
going on?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Paul swerved to a stop, tossed the gun back to the original officer, and just got out with his hands up in the air. And he was arrested, obviously.
Clearly.
But due to his age and the embarrassment of the police officer, he was sentenced for kidnapping and served months in a minimum security prison. So they didn't attach that it was a police officer that he had kidnapped, that he had done anything else. They just were like, "Oh, that's kidnapping," and basically tried to hush it.
For PR
Mhm.
purposes.
Like,
So,
yep.
yeah, people wouldn't laugh at the police officers.
Mhm. Paul, however, found minimum security much more lax
I was gonna
and
say,
less than he had to deal with in boys'
yeah,
school.
I was just thinking he just found home,
Yeah,
right?
he's like,
Like
"This is
I was
very
like, this is
comfortable."
great.
The day he was released, he went straight back to his wiles and committed a breaking and entering, burglary, and stole a vehicle all in the same day, and then drove away into the next town.
Oh my God.
He's like, this is just what I do now. For the next few years, he learned that the friendlier he was with police during run ins, the less likely he was to get sentenced for things. Even when they were light sentences compared to someone who was a multiple felon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that worked until 1970, however. Paul was getting older and the police began sharing information across counties and state lines, meaning that his convictions were eventually brought to light during other interactions with the police officers. And at the end of 1971, he was arrested for another breaking and entering. This time, he entered the home while the owners were present and tied them up.
Oh,
So he's escalating.
it's sort of impressive that he hasn't had to do that until this moment.
Hmm.
Um,
So it sounds like in multiple kind of sources that I've read that he would not stalk, he would case the place.
mm-hmm.
That's the word I'm looking for. And so he knew what was happening. He didn't just break in, one house a day and just walk in willy-nilly. He was watching houses or environments and finding out which ones were going to be the
Right.
easiest to get into and out of, up until this point. For this crime, he was sentenced to 3 years of hard labor. He made it to a work camp in 1972 and immediately set about making a lockpick out of the tools he was handed for
Oh
work.
my gosh. He's a resourceful guy.
He has to give him that.
That was his education as a kid.
Uh-huh. One night, he unlocked his cell and walked out of camp as the perimeter was unguarded at night because they were like, well, everybody's locked up, so we don't have to do like a roving guard. He walked back to civilization and committed a burglary for clothes and money, stole a car, and was off again
Oh my
before they
gosh.
even knew he was not there. When morning came, his cell was empty and a manhunt was initiated. Roadblocks were set up and Paul drove right up to one of them. He attempted to complete a U turn, but the police were behind him as well. Paul knew there was no escape, and so he got out of the car with his hands raised again. He was cuffed and sent to Ray Ford Prison. Officers there were informed of his escape, and so they made sure that he was heavily watched.
I am just thinking how great of a movie this would be.
Yeah.
Like, this guy is like, you can't really knock him
Hmm.
up, and because I just keep thinking, like, what could he do that would like get his foot up in society? Like when he was done getting out of jail or prison or wherever he was finished serving time for his breaking and entering.
Hmm.
What could he do to put him on the right track? And there's nothing. Like
Yeah.
maybe he could be like a mechanic but he probably doesn't have those skills. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, there definitely wasn't anything
yeah,
set up for
he's
him. He
just
just.
fail. Like he's just set up to fail. He
Hmm.
has to do what he's doing at
Hmm.
this point, at least.
Yeah. I mean, that's a common theme of people who enter into a prison is that. At first, the officer struggled with how to contain him. He didn't make friends, didn't have hobbies, and generally kept to himself. But punishments also didn't seem to faze him
Right.
because he had been through the boys' home.
Right.
Nothing they can do compared to that. Finally, a pen pal program came up, and it sounds like they kind of initiated this, the officers, like they slipped a little thing under his door so he'd be like, oh, pen pal program, as if they were handing out flyers to everybody.
Uh-huh.
And he saw it and he thought, well, nothing better to do. So out of boredom, Paul started writing to people.
That's actually genius.
Hmm. While many came and went from this program, one person stuck around. Angela Kovic brought something he hadn't expected into his life, and that is love, of course.
Oh.
She was in a failing marriage and ready to move on. She was separated and not divorced at this time. As the letters progressed, he told her bits of the truth about himself, but never the whole story. And soon the two were in love, and Angela was taking a bus to come visit him. On the first visit, Paul asked if she'd marry him, and she said yes. And with that, she set to work about getting her man out of the clink.
Oh.
And when I say she took a bus, I mean she took a cross country bus. She was from California,
Oh,
it's like
wow.
San Francisco area. So she was in it.
She was like uprooting her life and ready to go.
Well, I mean, so I think the plan was to move back there.
Okay.
Mm. But still, she did a lot for
Oh,
him. So
yeah.
she hired a new lawyer, Sheldon Yavitz, who set to work poking holes in his arrest and anything that the police did that would cause the case to get overturned. And his sentence was, in fact, overturned as a
Wow.
result of this. And Paul took the bus to San Francisco.
That is a good lawyer. I
Mm-hmm.
think it'd be hard to poke a ton of you'd have to do it based on like the way like the police investigated
Mm-hmm.
versus like his rap sheet is wild. So it's
Yeah.
hard to like convince anyone
Yeah.
that he's not doing these crimes.
Mm-hmm. But while he was riding across country, Angela was getting cold feet.
Mm,
So she went to see a psychic, because that's what you do, I guess.
that is what you do.
And the psychic told her that she saw a dangerous stranger coming into her life.
That's crazy.
With that, it was off.
Oh,
Only Paul didn't know until he rang the doorbell.
oh, Angela.
And it was then that he was made aware of the change of heart. According to Paul, that night he killed 2 people out of anger and shame, but this
Oh,
claim cannot be corroborated, so we don't know if that's true or not. Um, what is known is that in the morning he went back to Angela's and she got him a bus ticket back to Florida.
wow. Angela, I mean, I know Paul is about to turn into a monster, I'm pretty sure, but it sort of sounds like he sort of escaped a little bit of his own torture there. She
Mm.
sounds crazy.
Yeah, she went
Like,
to a psychic.
she spent, she got this guy a lawyer. She spent so, like, much energy arranging him to get out of this jail and, like, come to her and come across country. And then she goes to a psychic and changes her mind. She's crazy,
Yeah.
Paul. You are lucky.
Well,
I'm sure
maybe.
she's the lucky one in this
Yes.
scenario, but
Back in his old stomping grounds, Paul was sullen. He went to bars to drink away his feelings, and one night after a 12-hour bender, the bartender came to call in the tab. When Paul seemed immovable, the bartender got irate and started yelling at him, stepping in closer. Paul picked up a 4-inch knife and immediately sunk it into the side of the bartender.
oh,
Like there was no hesitation, no nothing. He just stood and like slammed it into his side
mm,
before pulling it out and then Paul caught the bartender as he fell to the ground. Other patrons beat Paul and went to the aid of the bartender, who survived. Paul didn't attempt to beat the case but didn't plead guilty. At trial, he was sentenced for his crime and handed down a lengthy sentence because of all of his past
mm-hmm.
indiscretions as well. He sat in jail acting like he was sorrowful until the night of July 26th, 1974, when he picked a lock, kicked the cell door open, and ran off into the night.
Oh my gosh, get this guy away from bobby pins.
Uh-huh.
Like, my God,
Any piece of metal. This is
that's
ridiculous.
incredible.
He knew he needed to get out of town fast since he had had to deal with the roadblocks last time, and so he broke into a house in his old stomping grounds, knowing that the lady who lived there was out of the home just as much as she was in, and so he says that he rolled the dice in this
Hmm.
situation. He broke the window of a back door and entered the house, and 65-year-old Alice Curtis heard the noise and came into the kitchen to investigate, so she was home this time.
Mm.
Turning on the light to see Paul standing in front of her, he tied her up with the clothesline she had in her dining room, and then he gagged her with a rag, and then got her keys and money from her purse. Moving through the house to search for valuables and clothes, in Alice's room he found a jewelry box that he took. He found suitable clothes for an outfit and put them on. Then he went to leave. Looking at Alice, he noticed that she was slumped over. He moved closer and realized that Alice was dead.
Oh,
So she had thrown up and it was seeping around the edges of the gag. The gag had happened to push Alice's dentures back into her throat, and so
oh
she choked
God.
on them. And he left immediately, having killed somebody hours after escaping from jail.
Oh, that's
Horrible.
awful.
And now
It's,
it's gonna get worse.
yeah, I was gonna say that just feels like the universe, like all of the little things that had to happen for that to happen right there, just like instantly created a monster.
Hmm.
I mean, he was already on the verge, right? Like,
Hmm.
but this, that, those dentures coming out of her mouth.
Yeah. And this kicks off a spree.
Yeah,
So we're about to begin.
yikes.
From there, he drove to his mother's, not for a reunion, but to grab his go bag. He snatched it and was on the road again. So it sounds like he had like buried it under like the side of a house or something like that. And he literally just went, grabbed it, and left.
It's interesting that he's still like in touch with his mom.
Mm-hmm. It didn't. Yeah, I know. It seems weird because they got rid of him and it doesn't say anywhere that he ever wrote to them in prison
Right.
or anything, but he had a bag.
Unless his go bag is full of like 13-year-old clothes.
God, I hope not. From there, he knew he needed to dump Alice's car, but he also knew he needed to move slow and methodically in order not to get caught. And as the sun rose, his absence at jail was noted, though at first they believed he had been transferred already, and so they were slow to reacting to the escape.
Hmm.
That morning, Alice's son also came over and found his mother tied to a chair, releasing her from the clothesline before finding out she was not breathing, so he called an ambulance and attempted to resuscitate. And forensics afterwards moved through the house for evidence, but because the son had done so much to try and help his mother, he had contaminated the scene, and
Hmm.
so they didn't get much in the way of evidence.
I mean, Paul should have not, like, he should have taken her off that chair.
Yeah, I don't think he cared.
I don't think he did either, but it would have maybe bought him some more time.
Oh, he didn't need it.
Okay.
Look at Paul's egress route. He passed by two of the neighborhood girls playing. Neither of them likely noticed, but couldn't take a chance, so he circled back and picked up 11-year-old Lillian
No.
and 7-year-old Mylette Anderson.
All right. All my tips for Paul and his murders are gone.
hmm hmm Telling them that their parents were looking for them and upset that they weren't home. And I guess the two girls started bickering and they were like, "We said that we were leaving and nobody ever listens to us." And this is, basically they were like
Hmm.
so mad that they had told their parents that they were leaving and now they were in trouble for leaving, is what they thought. Um, so the two girls were like, again, fighting about this and chatting in the back. And one of the girls finally realized after a while that they weren't headed home. And so Paul said that their parents had gone out. And so he was taking them to the parents. And they either bought it or didn't say anything. When they stopped in the swamp, Paul immediately went to the back seat and strangled the oldest 11-year-old Lillian.
Why? Like, just because he thinks that they were witnesses?
Mm-hmm. Milet tried to escape and even managing to get out of the car, but of course, Paul is much larger and quickly caught up to her, strangling her as well. Then he threw both girls in the swamps, putting his car in drive and heading east. And
Oh,
they were never recovered.
that's just awful.
Mm-hmm.
It's awful.
It is.
I mean, to think too, like, he should have just tested to, like, these girls didn't even realize that they weren't going home for the first little bit. Like, they got in a stranger's car
Well, they knew him from the
and,
neighborhood, supposedly, so.
like, you'd think, like, okay, I tested the waters there. Those girls, they're not gonna be good eyewitnesses. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm safe. I'm
Yeah,
safe. I'm okay.
yeah.
Like,
Or just go.
I know, just
Even
leave.
if they say anything, it's going to be hours later,
Right.
probably, because they're out playing.
And they're children, so
Mm-hmm.
like they might not know your name. Like, yeah, just stupid. It's to me that feels way less about cleaning up loose ends and more about like he's now unhinged.
Mm-hmm. Driving to the Atlantic beach, he stayed there hoping that in mere weeks all of the happenings from Jacksonville would die down and he'd be able to move on. But while he waited, he went to bars and upscale restaurants looking for women. One such night, he met Marjorie Howie, a 49-year-old. After chatting her up, the two went to her apartment, which was just a few blocks away. And when they got there, Paul stripped her of her pantyhose and then used them to bind her, and then as a garrote and strangled her.
Oh my God.
As she was dying, she managed to take off her wedding rings and hide them in the shag carpet. And so
What?
she was also they was taking a break, it sounds like, from the husband. Like they were separated, but
Mm-hmm.
not legally divorced or anything like that. They were on a trial separation. And so she had the wherewithal to like hide her own wedding rings, which is sad.
Yeah, it also maybe like I don't know, maybe she didn't have her rings on and they fell out of her pocket or something like that. Like that seems interesting to me that you would care so much about saving your wedding rings.
hmm Well, if you think about somebody robbing you, maybe she's like, these are precious to me, so
Yeah,
I'm hiding them.
I got robbed in New York once,
Mhm.
and I had just gotten a ring for Christmas from my boss at the time, and I took my ring off and I threw it.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Did you find
so
it later?
I did.
Mm.
I still have it. It's my favorite ring.
After he went through her apartment and took any items of value, including guns, which were later linked to other crimes, he piled them beside Marjorie before going and getting his car at the bar and returning to the apartment to fill it. Marjorie was discovered days later when her estranged husband came back to try and make amends. I know. Paul then headed north and along the route picked up a hitchhiker in August, but when she declined his advances, he got angry. As they drove into the back roads, the two began to argue, and Paul struck her, stunning her. Then he stopped the car and drug her out of it. In a fit, he raped and strangled her. When she was dead, he dumped her in the brush. She wasn't found for months, and by then was severely decayed, and as a result, she remained a Jane Doe for decades.
So it seems crazy to me. It feels like this is easier for him than just like B&Es.
Mm-hmm. He's just doing what he
Because he's
wants.
just going and going. Like he was getting picked up after he would
Mm-hmm.
break into houses and he was actually getting punished for these things.
Mm-hmm.
And now he is murdering people
Mm-hmm.
one after
Mm-hmm.
another and just cruising the country.
Mm-hmm. He sure is. So after listening to recordings that he makes later, were able to put the pieces together, and it ended up being 13-year-old Emma Jean Sanders who went missing from Warner Robins, Georgia, and Paul named her as Alma in his recordings.
Ugh, I hate that he's like targets children.
Easy prey.
It's gross.
I know it is. On August 15th, he was in West Macon, where he broke into a home brandishing a 38 caliber pistol. He attempted to rape the owner who fought back and in the ensuing struggle shot her in the stomach. Her 13-year-old son called the police, scaring Paul off, and he made it to Missoula on August 23rd.
Wow.
hmm He landed on the doorstep of Kathy Pierce, who was home with her 3-year-old son.
Oh no.
Paul managed to get into the house, and it sounds like they think that he acted as like a door-to-door salesman or something,
Hmm.
and she's like, no thanks, but he still got in the house. And when he did, Kathy threatened to call police, picking up the phone, which of course was corded at the time. So Paul took the phone cord and wrapped it around her neck and pushed her into the bathroom. During the altercation, the 3-year-old came in and watched as his mother's life
Oh
was
no.
extinguished. Since the boy didn't move, Paul continued to rob the house. Then he looked at the boy one last time before leaving.
Oh wow.
Yeah, Katie's husband came home at the end of the day to find his wife murdered and his son stunned.
Oh, that is so sad.
hmm
I just like, oh, I hope that little boy is okay at this point in his life.
Yeah. And so it sounds like they did several interviews and he was could talk about the situation, but up to the point of her actually getting murdered. And then he's just like, oh, it was the bad man,
Mm-hmm.
and that was about it. There was no good description that came from it.
Mm.
Again, he's only 3, so we're not
Right.
expecting him to be perfect.
Right.
On September 3rd, Paul made it to Lima, Ohio. There, he sat drinking at a bar at the Scott's Inn when he met William Bates. The two chatted and drank, shutting down the dive bar. Paul offered him a ride home, taking off down the road, and the two drove for a long time before finding a dirt road, at which point Paul stated he was lost and got out of the car to get his bearings. But instead, he went to the passenger side and opened the door, moving William. As William got out of the car, Paul strangled him. Once again, just dumping him in the bushes, but not before taking his wallet and keys. He ditched the car that he had been driving since Florida, took some of his items out of it, and exchanged it for William's vehicle.
He just is like on a rampage.
hmm
I can't imagine he's getting a bunch of money from these murders either.
It's
Like,
just enough to survive, it sounds like, and that's fine with him.
ugh, that's so sad and
It
sick.
is. William was reported missing the next morning, but not found for a month. Meanwhile, Paul continued to move, making it to Ely, Nevada on September 18th.
He is all over the place.
He is. And it doesn't really feel like he has any particular plan. He's just driving. There, he met an elderly couple at a rest stop along the highway, Emmett and Louise Johnson. Both were shot in the temple with a small caliber pistol.
Mm.
Once they were dead, he took their cash that was available, and then he pulled Emmett's body kind of into the side because he was like outside, it sounds like, to be concealed. Then in the camper, he cleaned up and threw bleach on everything to prevent forensic evidence leading back to him.
I mean, he would be difficult to catch. Like,
Yeah.
he's in Montana and then he's in Ohio and then Nevada. Like, it would
Hmm.
be difficult at this time in our history for the police to think, oh, let's try to connect him to all of the 50 other states and
Hmm.
see, like,
And
and they're all different murders.
yeah,
Like,
and a lot of these bodies aren't found right away.
right.
So it makes, I don't know,
Yeah, he doesn't,
that would make
he
it so
like
difficult.
strangles them, he ties some up, he
He
doesn't
shoots
tie some
some.
up, he shoots some, yeah, like, it's just very strange.
Hmm.
Yeah.
3 days later, he made it to Seguin, Texas. As he drove, he spotted Charlene Hicks, whose car was broken down on the side of the road. He pulled over under the pretense to be a worried driver. Instead, he pulled her down the embankment where he raped and strangled her. After he pushed her body down to a barbed wire fence.
Oh,
So when she was found, she was like all cut
like,
up and mangled from it. On September 23rd, Paul made it to Birmingham. Here, he picked up Ann Dawson, but she wanted freedom from her life, and so she took to the road with him. For 6 days, they drank and stayed in hotels together. Then on September 29th, he was done with her and killed her.
oh my, like,
She's never been found.
oh,
Hmm.
I just again like blows my mind. Like 6 days.
Hmm.
I feel like you potentially could like actually have a little bit of a connection with this person now.
And then he
Like,
just shuts it
but
off.
then he's just like, "Shh,
Yeah, no
I'm
thanks.
done with you.
Hmm.
I'm gonna like literally dispose of you."
That's crazy to me. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem to have feelings or remorse about any of it either.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to his childhood.
Yeah,
He had no one
yeah.
care for him, which I was having a thought when we were talking about this, like the best, and I know that in an ideal world, this is probably what they'd shoot for, but like the best like reform school for children would to be like give them with unconditional love and like very little consequences for their actions and things like that and just love 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 on them because then when they become 18 and they break the law and they go to jail or prison and they are like dealing with the legal system they're like this sucks like
Hmm.
my childhood was so good this sucks
Yeah,
and then maybe you'd have a chance of like reforming them as an adult. um
maybe, but I don't see any of that working out.
I also
No
don't see I
consequences.
also don't see any like very, very few human adults that can just give unconditional love to troubled children.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And no action or no consequences for actions would be very difficult
Right.
because then they're not learning anything either. So,
Right. Well, like the consequences would be, not getting beat or raped by the people who are supposed to be taking care of it. It would be like, you have to cook dinner tonight for everyone now.
that is the most no,
I,
that still wouldn't work.
I
Still wouldn't
I'm
work.
aware.
Oh my goodness. Okay, back to this.
Yeah.
On October 19th, Paul was in Woodford, Virginia, and back on the prowl. He broke into 53-year-old Doris Hovey's house, finding her rifle, which he shot her with,
Hmm.
killing her. Then he moved through the house to find valuables, but didn't disturb other items, making the house look clean before leaving, so you wouldn't know that it was breaking and entering for valuables. Doris Bruce Hosey was murdered next. Then Paul went to Connecticut, where he found Karen Wine and her daughter, Dawn. He broke into their home, raped and killed them, and then set about stealing items for money. Paul then traveled back to Key West, picking up two hitchhikers this time. As they drove down the road, lights flashed behind him. He got pulled over, but his smooth talking somehow convinced the police officer to let him go with just a warning. But that run in had Paul in a state.
Like we're at like 10 to 12 people at this point.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah. And it's all within months if you notice. Like
Oh, it's
it
so
stayed,
quick.
yeah.
Yeah.
He So when he was back in Florida, he got in contact with his lawyer, Sheldon Yavitz, unburdening himself with a confession. Sheldon told Paul if he wanted proper representation, he should confess everything to him in writing. While Paul didn't want to write it down, he did record it,
Oh.
hand delivering it to Sheldon days later. Then he was back on the road.
Hmm.
On November 2nd, Eddie Hillard and Debbie Griffin were hitchhiking near Macomb. Eddie was found in the woods near their last known location, and Eddie had been shot to death. Almost a year later, Debbie's body was also found. She too was shot, and she was a few miles away from where Eddie was found.
That is like, ha- it's just so many. And for no reason. It's sort of like hard for me to comprehend this one.
Yeah, because there's no real motive other than just
Yeah,
killing
like
people.
for maybe a few $100, like if you're lucky.
And
Like,
hitchhikers, I wouldn't expect them to be carrying a whole lot of
right.
cash. So this just feels like, I'm just doing it to do it.
Yeah.
Like there's no real reason.
There's no type of person that
Mm-mm.
you're going after. It's not mommy or daddy issues. It's just like societal issues. Like he's just like, I hate everything.
Yep. 4 days later, Paul met 45-year-old Carswell Carr in Middle Middlechville, Georgia. Carswell lived with his teenage daughter, Amanda, and Paul entered their home as a friend, but walked straight into the kitchen, pulled out a pair of scissors, and stabbed Carswell
Oh,
27 times.
what?
Then he strangled Amanda, killing her as well, and robbed the house and then left.
What?
Yeah.
Like,
So it sounds like Carswell had met up with him at a bar or something, and they were
uh-huh.
talking and joking, and he's like, "Oh man, you must be down on your luck. Like, why don't you spend the night at my house?" And so he's like, "Yeah, sure." And they came over, and it was a jovial. And then he literally just was like, "Here's a pair of scissors."
Man, stories like this that make me,
Not want to be a good Samaritan and
yeah,
help people. Yep,
yeah,
sure enough.
yeah.
On November 8th, Paul was in a bar in Atlanta where he met Sandy Fox. She was a British journalist who had job interviews lined up in the US. For days, he carted her around, even joking that she would write a book about him one day.
Mm,
On November 10th, he even offered a ride to another journalist, so one of her friends that had kind of met along the way, Susan Mackenzie. The next day in the evening, Sandy got a knock on the door. The police were asking if she knew where Paul was, that during his ride with Susan, he pulled a gun on her and told her to have sex with him or he'd shoot her. Susan had managed to get out of the moving car. Paul stopped and meant to chase her, but a police car happened to drive by,
oh,
and she literally ran straight to the police car. And the
oh,
police officer saw everything, and Paul showed a sawed off shotgun before getting into his own car and taking flight. The police officer stayed with Susan rather than giving chase.
wow. That is bad luck. That's bad luck for Paul. Great luck for
That's
Susan.
great luck for Susan. What are you
No, it's
talking about?
great luck for
Yeah.
Susan. It's just like so
And good luck that the officer didn't give chase. He stayed with the victim instead. He could have taken off
oh
after
yeah,
him, and maybe that would have been the end of the story.
right.
Paul then traveled to West Palm Beach, breaking into Beverly Mabee's house. Beverly was disabled, suffering from cerebral palsy and requiring a wheelchair. And so Paul didn't rape her, but he told Barbara Mabel maybe Abel he tried when she happened to walk into the home to check on Beverly, and Barbara was her sister.
Mm,
Barbara said that Paul first attempted to walk out with her own 6-year-old son, Dale, and she told him to take her instead. That she could see he had a sawed-off shotgun still. They drove for a full day, pulling into a hotel that night. Paul still had the sawed-off shotgun under his coat, and so Barbara pretended that they were married because she was worried that he would shoot the front desk attendant when they
mm.
were there. So
So
she like wrapped her arm around him and was like, "Hey, honey, like
right,
we're gonna get a hotel room and stuff," trying to like intervene and act like this was okay.
like we're cool. I'm cool
hmm
with this.
hmm
Did he leave the 6-year-old behind then,
Yeah,
it sounds like?
he did.
Oh, okay.
He became charming, but still that first night forced himself on her, but didn't kill her. She also reported, quote, at the motel, he kept the TV on the whole time. The news came on, and all of a sudden, my face and his face were on the stations, NBC, CBS, and ABC. The news was about me being kidnapped, and now he had killed somebody. He was excited. That's when it finally hit me. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to write a book. And me being a radio copywriter by profession, I told him I could help. My job was what saved me
Wow.
because this serial killer wanted me to tell his story. The next day, we went to a restaurant and I pretended to be in love with him because I knew that if I opened my mouth, people would be killed. When we got back to the motel, he raped me again and tied me up and gagged me before he left to make a phone call. When he got back around 1 in the morning, he realized he left the key in the room. He was locked out and couldn't get back in. Through the door, he told me he knew I couldn't talk, I was gagged, but that he was leaving. The last thing he said to me was, I love you. End quote.
Sorry, I tried to contain myself during that, but
I know that's why I kept talking over you.
I know.
So you could remember it was a quote. You do it every
Oh,
time.
I know. It's because it's so like profound. That one, like, that was smart. She
Hmm.
was like, that's incredibly smart
Yeah.
to leverage your understanding of like what this guy wants.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think there was also a little bit of luck there that the door was locked. And so he was just like, all right,
right.
bye,
Yeah. I mean,
essentially.
incredibly
Hmm.
lucky.
Yeah.
But it's smart. Like,
Yeah.
he could have killed her that night.
He definitely could have.
Yeah.
On November 16th, he was in Perry, Florida. A highway patrol officer, Charles Campbell, noted that the car was stolen and found Paul in the driver's seat asleep. He pulled Paul out of the car, but Paul turned and pulled the revolver from the officer's belt.
Oh my
Again,
God.
Paul
Oh,
placed the officer in his own cuffs and then in the back of the patrol car before going to his own car. He didn't take off, but instead got his valuables and went back to the police car, taking off with it and the officer. When he pulled behind another car, he turned the lights on and sirens. James Meyer was a businessman who was just getting home from work, or headed home from work, excuse me, and he was cuffed and put into the back seat where the officer was placed.
what?
Then again, he was on the road. When he made it to Pulaski County, Georgia, he took the hostages out of the car and tied them to a tree. According to him, since they likely wouldn't be found for a while and would die anyway, he turned and shot both of them once in the head, killing them. They were
What?
found handcuffed to a tree days later.
That's so wild. Like, so ballsy
Hmm.
to steal a police car.
And then he's driving in it with an officer
You're
in the back.
driving in it with an officer in the back, and then you decide to turn the lights on and pull someone over.
Hmm.
That's absolutely crazy.
Hmm. He then continued down the road, coming up to a roadblock, but instead of slowing, he hit the gas, hitting a car and crushing a police officer. Dozens of others were knocked down. The police opened fire, disabling the vehicle, and it kind of rolled to a stop, like in a ditch, pretty far down from them, so he had enough room to get his weapons and cash and run.
Oh my God.
In all the gunfire, Paul got hit in the foot, but it didn't stop him. He kept running. Through the night, he moved. Then, when he thought he was far enough away, he stepped onto the road, and that's when he heard a shotgun being cocked.
Oh,
He raised his hands in defeat and turned to find that he wasn't face to face with a police officer. He was, in fact, in front of a Vietnam veteran, David Clark,
oh, wow.
who was working on a decommissioned structure in the area when he heard about the foot chase on the radio. And he was the one to capture Paul, and he held him until police arrived.
He was a good guy with a gun.
He was like, "No, we're not doing this anymore." When he was brought to jail, the media named him as the Casanova Killer due to his, quote, gaunt good looks, end quote.
Hmm.
So he was like a decent looking fellow.
That's like everything he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he just got like everything that he's worked for
Mm-hmm.
was that name. And
Mm-hmm.
he got a good one.
I know he did.
They should have called him like the nobody or something
I
like that.
don't know. Why do they all get names? Naming
I
people.
know. He was like dreaming of that moment, and they gave him a better dream than I'm sure he ever dreamed about.
Mm-hmm. He told a psychiatrist, quote, I am a criminal and I've been a criminal since I was a little kid, end quote.
Well, yeah.
Hmm. On December 18th, Paul offered to bring police to where Officer Campbell's service pistol was, and they had never recovered it, and they really wanted to. So FBI agent Ron Angel and Sheriff Earl Lee took him up on his offer. As they drove down the road, Paul picked the lock on his cuffs and then slowly moved forward before lunging to pull the police officer's pistol.
No.
I can see you.
No.
But Angel was faster,
Oh, thank
turning
God.
turning and putting 3 rounds into Paul's chest.
Oh, good.
Paul died in the back of that car.
Good.
Paul claimed to have killed 35 people, but authorities have said that he was known to embellish his crimes and have not substantiated all of his claims.
Hmm.
However, with the confessions, 18 have been positively linked to him, and his reign of terror lasted from July 1974 to November of 1974.
What?
Hmm.
Wait, say that again?
July to November of 1974.
18 confirmed people
Hmm.
in 6 months, 5 months?
Hmm.
Whoa.
Hmm.
Wow, that's crazy. This man, like, should have never gotten out of
Hmm.
prison.
No, I mean, they didn't intend for him to. He picked the lock and ran.
It's true. You're right. That's true. It's not like they've said, you're free now.
Hmm.
He literally escaped and then killed someone that night and never stopped.
Hmm.
That's like a body every week almost.
Yeah, it's so many.
That's
But
crazy.
yeah,
That's absolutely insane. And he was like trying to smash a car through barricades. Like he was
he didn't care.
like not being subtle. He
Hmm.
wasn't trying to cover his tracks. He just was like,
Hmm.
let's just see how far I can get before I.
Yeah, and it sounds like while he was in jail before all of this, before he went out, they would talk to him and he had no remorse for any of his killings. He wanted that journalist, the British journalist, to come back, and he really wanted somebody to write a book
Oh,
about
I'm
him.
sure.
And I mean, he got his wish. There are books about him now,
Yeah,
but much after he was killed. So,
crazy.
yeah,
That I mean,
that's the case of the Casanova Killer.
I hate that they gave him that name
I
because it's a
know.
cool name.
I know. People suck.
He doesn't deserve it.
No, he doesn't. But with that, to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.